From DLA Piper, this is the Beyond the Curve podcast. In this episode, DLA Piper's Rich Klawiter and Dominique Gonzales are joined by Mary Meg McCarthy, Executive Director of the National Immigrant Justice Center, for a discussion on the current immigration system.
I'm Rich Klawiter, a partner in the Chicago office of DLA Piper and co-vice chair of the firm's National Real Estate Law Practice Group. I am a member of the National Pro Bono Committee and the head of the Pro Bono Committee in Chicago. All DLA lawyers are expected to do pro bono work. It's a core firm value, and we put a lot of resources behind it. In 2023 alone, DLA Piper lawyers logged over 124,000 pro bono hours in North America. Humanitarian immigration is one of, if not the largest, of our pro bono areas. U.S. DLA lawyers worked over 20,000 hours on immigration, migrant, and refugee matters in 2023 alone. Lawyers and other business professionals across the U.S. and the globe contribute to serving the forcibly displaced, and this is a priority for us across the globe and is not just limited to Chicago, which is where the three of us are from. We're proud of what we do as a firm and the partners with whom we do it. We wanted to discuss the current state of the immigration system while also profiling some of the wonderful pro bono work that DLA Piper lawyers do in this important area. Two of us here today, myself and associate Dominique Gonzales, are real estate lawyers who are passionate about immigration law and committed to finding pathways to citizenship and social services for our newest arrivals. A third member is Mary Meg McCarthy, who runs National Immigrant Justice Center and is on the front lines representing immigrants and advocating nationally for their rights and fair treatment. NIJC, her organization, is an important referral source for DLA lawyers, and she is both a thought leader and a counselor to those of us with whom she places individual cases. I'm also privileged to be a member of her board of directors. Let me ask Mary Meg and then Dominique to briefly introduce themselves.
Good afternoon. I'm Mary Meg McCarthy. I'm the Executive Director of the National Immigrant Justice Center. I have served in this position for about 25 years, and during that time, I have seen a lot of changes in the immigration field. It is one of the most dynamic fields in the country and the world. And I have a team of about 170 attorneys, paralegals, and professionals who all work together to fulfill our mission to advance immigrant rights, along with 2,000 pro bono attorneys, of which Dominique and Rich are members of that incredible, extraordinary support that we receive at NIJC. I'm also grateful for a wonderful board of directors that really help the organization move forward in response to what is an ever-changing reality.
Thank you, Mary Meg, and over to you, Dom.
Thank you. I am Dominique Gonzales. I am a real estate associate here in the Chicago office of DLA Piper. I'm very privileged to work with Rich in our typical practice. I'm also very privileged to have a thriving pro bono practice and have received the support of the DLA Piper pro bono team in pursuing that in addition to my regular day-to-day practice.
I'm very proud to say that Dom is one of the recipients of DLA Piper's National Pro Bono Award last year for much of the work that she does in the area of immigration. So we're privileged to have both Mary Meg and Dominique join us today. Issues concerning temporary housing solutions, from tent camps to police stations, from public spaces to temporary and permanent housing solutions, are regular topics of discussion and debate in our city. There is limited availability of rental assistance and a very lengthy process to obtain work permits. There are looming deadlines for leaving temporary shelters and a real risk of homelessness for those who are unable to secure long-term housing. Throughout these cities, shelters have reached capacity and the financial strain is acute. Beyond providing immediate shelter and social services, there is a broader need to economically integrate migrants, including helping them secure work permits and access to education and healthcare. That is a snapshot of where we are today. A quick word about myself and how I came to have the privilege of moderating this podcast. In my day job, I'm a real estate lawyer at DLA Piper and represent clients in navigating the entitlements, government relations, zoning, and financing aspects of some of the largest projects in and around Chicago. I recently returned from a week-long stint at the border town of Brownsville, Texas, with several colleagues and local advocates under the auspices of a pilot program sponsored jointly by the American Bar Association and USCIS. I've done several tours of duty at the border over the past several years, helping immigrants navigate the asylum system, and I've also handled a number of individual cases representing asylum seekers. Let me begin with you, Mary Meg, and ask you to describe for us how it is that you became interested in immigration law and policy.
Thank you, Rich. I became involved in immigration law and policy because I see it as a human rights issue. These are human beings who are seeking protection in our country or in other countries throughout the world. I wanted to work with a population in our communities who were facing some of the same obstacles, and that's where I became involved with immigration work. And I've continued in my journey working on behalf of immigrants, refugees, and asylum seekers who are seeking access to justice, who are seeking the ability to exercise their rights to have access to the courtroom doors in a meaningful way. And oftentimes that is only through representation by trained and supported lawyers in our communities. So access to justice for immigrants, refugees, and asylum seekers is a human right. And that is what has driven me and continues to inspire me to do the work that I do every day.
Let me ask Dom the same question, how it is that you became interested in immigration law and policy. You are, after all, an associate at DLA Piper in Chicago's office. Nothing about real estate necessarily has much to do with immigration law. So how is it that a real estate associate in Chicago became interested in immigration law and doing the kind of pro bono work in that area that you do?
I started down this path actually as an advocate for human rights. So I had always known that I would be going into the law. I did always want to be a lawyer. And interestingly enough, I married that passion and that desire with a language skill. So I am Italian by heritage, but was really passionate about studying Spanish. And as I progressed down that path, contemporaneously with heading towards law school and pursuing a career as a lawyer, I found that those skill sets were really great individually, but that I was able to help more people by merging them. So before I had the privilege of joining DLA, I was able to live and work in Mallorca, where I worked at a law firm, ironically also doing real estate work there. And in my time, I was able to work with certain populations of Romani people as part of a teaching program that I was part of. I was able to, during law school, intern with an NGO in London, where DLA actually sends a number of lawyers on secondment reprieve, working on death penalty cases. And I also spent time in law school working at the Inter-American Court of Human Rights in Costa Rica, which was wonderful. So I have really been exposed to a broad breadth of pro bono and public interest work. My decision to join DLA was based not only on its wonderful and collaborative culture, but also its commitment to pro bono. And it was while I was here that our pro bono team was able to guide me and position me to best leverage the skills that I have been able to build. And that's how I ended up really strongly championing all of the work that our pro bono group does in terms of immigration and being able to participate in really meaningful cases.
Let's zoom out for a minute, if we could, and ask Mary Meg to give us a short primer on the basics of what it means to immigrate to the United States. What's the process look like for an immigrant seeking safe passage to the United States, seeking to obtain a work visa or a green card? What does it look like, and what are the various types of status? Help us unpack a little bit the maze and the confusion that is the immigration and asylum process, and help us understand what happens to immigrant families during the course of this process, and how do they become eligible for government support services and financial assistance?
People are able to immigrate to the United States based on three types of situations. One's the humanitarian basis, and that is where you are seeing today individuals coming into the country seeking asylum or another type of relief, which is called temporary protected status. The other group would be individuals who are coming to be reunited with their family members who petition for them. So you have protection-based claims, you have family claims, and then the third group would be employment claims. At the National Immigrant Justice Center, we focus on those first two. And right now we're seeing a very, very heavy demand for legal services for individuals who are fleeing danger in their home countries and seeking protection in the United States. Asylum is an international protection under the 1951 Convention on Refugees. The U.S. is a signatory to the protocol, and that requires us and obligates us to allow individuals who are fleeing persecution based on 5 grounds to obtain asylum in the United States. That's a difficult standard, though, to prove. And they're in immigration court. They're up against a trial attorney who's an experienced prosecutor. They have to explain themselves, and their application has to be in English. They do have interpreters, but oftentimes if you have a language that may be an indigenous language or whatnot, that interpreter may not necessarily understand that person. But they have to, more importantly, understand what are the elements to an asylum case that they must prove. Individuals without lawyers have a very, very difficult time. It's a very low success rate. Individuals with representation are 5 times more likely to obtain relief and legal status as opposed to their counterparts who are unrepresented. But let me back up in terms of work authorization. So the individual who is seeking asylum files their asylum application. At that point, provided that they have not asked for any continuances, after 150 days of waiting for that case to be heard, they can then apply for work authorization. At that 180-day mark, they are then eligible to secure that work authorization. Unfortunately, adjudicating those requests for work authorization varies, sometimes for a year. So that's very difficult. The good news is now the administration has said those work authorizations are good for 5 years. So the individual, if they are able to secure that work authorization, have permission to work in the United States for 5 years. So you might ask, why 5 years? Because the immigration courts are so backlogged, it often takes 5 years or longer for that case to be heard by the immigration judge. Now, there is an effort to address that, but unfortunately, it's an effort that doesn't necessarily ensure due process. Here in Chicago, the administration has implemented what they call the recent arrival docket, whereby individuals who have recently arrived will be scheduled for what's called a master calendar call, a status hearing, in which time they will have to then present their asylum application. And if they don't have it prepared at that time, the court will give them 2 weeks to present that and file it. Once that application is filed, the court will then set that case for a hearing, for a merits hearing, for a trial. And that all has to occur within 180 days. During those 180 days, they have to wait to get work authorization. So those individuals will not be able to work and often are dependent on people of goodwill to provide them with housing and food and care to get their children in school, to help them live a dignified life. So there are a lot of challenges facing the communities right now that we're seeing who've recently arrived. And there's also a lot of goodwill in our community.
Thanks, Mary Meg. So let's try to break down what it means to sort of operate within that legal framework and in that environment of legal challenge. So Dom, we've been given a sense by Mary Meg of what that legal framework looks like and what the implications of that legal framework might be for people representing individual asylum seekers on a pro bono basis. Do you mind helping us flesh that out and better understand it by describing or highlighting 1 or 2 cases with which you've been involved, just so that we have a sense of what it's like to be boots on the ground in representing one or more of these asylum seekers?
Absolutely. The first case I think that comes to mind for me is actually the first really substantive pro bono asylum case that I took on when I joined DLA. The case had been pending for 7 years already before I joined the firm, and there was a mother and a daughter. And I think that was an initial matter, an initial step, goes to show the life cycle of these cases and how long they take. Not only that, but very often before they even come to a firm like DLA Piper, how many steps that our clients have been through, not just presumably the journey that they have made to get here, to cross the border. They have spent time probably in a holding facility or a shelter of some kind. They have been given the resource to contact NIJC or another organization who has then reviewed and processed their claim and sent that along to a firm like DLA, having already vetted it. So there are so many steps that happen even before we get involved. And once we do get involved, the claim continues pending and the clock continues running while our clients are trying to navigate the various landscapes of a foreign country and foreign processes. So that as an initial matter is just the life cycle of a case takes an incredibly long time. And the case I am thinking of, after those 7 years, we got involved and filed a motion to advance in the courts, which tried to move up their scheduled date. Something that happens is that courts will very frequently and on very little notice reschedule hearing dates that have been in the books for years, which is what happened to our clients. I believe their initial date had been scheduled during the time of the pandemic, and they received a date sometime in 2026, I want to say, out from 2021. Something to be aware of is just how long that is pending. And in terms of the individual parts of the case, and preparing clients to attend court and try to vindicate their rights and receive relief very often requires hours upon hours of really grueling interrogation in connection with preparing what we call a declaration that needs to be submitted with their brief. So the lawyers prepare everything, but the brief is a legal brief, much like you would see in any other case. And the declaration is a walkthrough. The high and low of what happened was that we were able to advance the hearing to, unfortunately, not when we had asked for. We did ask for a bit of a lead time, and we got something like 10 weeks, I think, to pull everything together. But we were able to advance this date years now ahead of what it had been scheduled for. And we received a positive decision on the spot. And something else to note is that even if you receive the outcome you want, you have to make sure that the government waives its right to appeal. It takes hundreds and hundreds of man hours and hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal bills to very often bring justice to people and have them achieve relief. And I think that is a really stark reality and just sheds light on the amount of effort and education and skills and resources that go into these cases and how really necessary they are to make an impact for people.
Dom, you're a month away from being a new mom, and you've represented moms and their children in immigration proceedings. In fact, the case that you just talked about involved the representation of a mom and her child or children. How, if at all, on a personal basis, has the prospect of your becoming a new mom informed your perspective on the women you've represented along the way?
It does make me feel incredibly, incredibly grateful. In that same case that we had just discussed, the asylum case, our clients had a sister who had come over previously, so her case was handled separately. And something that so stuck with me was that as we were preparing to go into court and we were armed with all of these boxes because the case had been pending for so long, it was a quote unquote paper case. So we had a brief in excess of 1,000 pages with all of these attachments, and we printed 3 copies and had them boxed up. So we were toting them around with us. And we are in this restroom about to go in for the family's case, and the sister turned to my colleague, who's another real estate associate, and myself, and asked if we were paralegals or if we were lawyers. And we told her we are lawyers, and she just burst into tears and started sobbing hysterically and told us that it was always her dream to become a lawyer. And it really struck me, kind of hindsight being 2020, had this woman been born somewhere else, had she been born in a different time, had she not been kidnapped and trafficked in middle school, what opportunity would have looked like for her, what her life would have looked like for her. And by extension, it really made me reflect. I also always dreamt to be a lawyer, but I was very fortunate to be born somewhere where I could do that and have the support through school where I was able to achieve that. And even the more kind of minutia, right, that I had the support to sit for the bar exam and actually qualify to become a lawyer. All of these steps along the way, for sure, are born of hard work, but also incredible luck and circumstance. So that's something that I for sure reflect on as a soon-to-be parent. Is I feel very grateful that my child will be born with opportunities to do whatever it is that he wants to pursue and is not locked into anything just because there's no stability and the circumstances around him aren't preventing him from doing X or Y or Z. So I do think that that is something that I'm sure all parents relate to, which is that you just want the best for your children.
Mary Meg, many of our listeners are likely to be experts in one field or another. It could be real estate, it could be finance, corporate, tax, some litigators, intellectual property, lawyers, and clients. How can people, whether they're lawyers or not, contribute? And what resources, in addition to financial, are needed to create long-term solutions?
Great question, Rich. I'd just like to follow up on something that Dominique said, too, about her experience and reflections about the opportunities that her son will have. There are just so many opportunities that we have opened up to our clients because of securing that legal status that was so very critical to their dreams and to their futures and to their children's futures. So I just want to say there is a legacy to the work that we're doing day in and day out that really not only contributes to those individuals, but really contributes to our communities. When you think about how rich we are as a country because of the various cultures that have invested in this country, whether it's food or music, but we're a richer country because of immigrants. As I said earlier, there's so many volunteer groups and neighborhood groups and religious organizations that are really responding to the needs of the immigrant community, whether it be shelter or food or transportation or medical care or clothing drives. Those experiences serving the immigrant community, I think, are really life-changing. And that goes for not only adults, but young people, too. Of course, providing legal services if you're an attorney and partnering with other organizations is critical. Lawyers have wonderful bilingual language skills that really can make a difference in people's lives. And of course, financial support for education, for filing fees. Even the young people who are still eligible for what's called DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, they have to pay a $500 filing fee.
All right, I want to thank my amazing colleague, Dominique, and my friend and mentor, Mary Meg McCarthy from NIJC for joining me today. I appreciate your time, and I greatly admire your efforts and characters. Thanks very much.
Thank you for listening to DLA Piper's Beyond the Curve podcast. All information, content, and materials contained in this podcast are for general informational purposes only. This podcast is intended to be a general overview of the subjects discussed and does not create a lawyer-client relationship. Statements and opinions are those of the individual speakers and participants and do not necessarily reflect the policies or opinions of DLA Piper, LLP US. The information contained in this podcast is not and should not be used as a substitute for legal advice. No listener should act or refrain from acting with respect to any particular legal matter on the basis of this podcast without first seeking legal advice from counsel in the relevant jurisdiction. This podcast may qualify as lawyer advertising, requiring notice in some jurisdictions. Prior results do not guarantee a similar outcome. DLA Piper, LLP US accepts no responsibility for any actions taken or not taken as a result of this podcast.